They said the trial would be fair, but from the moment she stepped into the courthouse, justice had already left town. Before we get into this tale, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And subscribe if you want more content like this one. The dust on the long road settled like a shroud behind her, a fitting companion to the unease blooming in Naomi's breast. Weeks had crawled by on the rails. Then days bled into endless hours on a stagecoach, each mile carrying her further from everything she had known towards a future painted in the broad strokes of a stranger's letter. Hope, a fragile, brittle thing, had been her only sustenance. A name, a promise, a photograph of a man with kind, though distant, eyes, and the faint, almost imperceptible tremor of his pen in the scrawled address. He promised a home, a life, a quiet existence away from the shadowed prejudices of her birthplace. He promised a husband's embrace, a sanctuary. But as the coach finally groaned to a halt, spitting her out onto a parched, desolate track, the promise withered on her tongue like ash. Before her stood not the welcoming homestead of her dreams, but a skeleton of a house, its windows like vacant eyes staring out over a landscape that seemed to swallow sound. The wood of its walls, once surely painted a cheerful hue, was now faded, peeling, clinging desperately to a memory of vibrancy. The porch sagged, a broken tooth in a tired smile. No welcoming figure emerged, no excited greeting rippled across the dusty expanse. Only the relentless whisper of the wind, a mournful lament through the skeletal branches of a lone ancient oak. A knot tightened in her stomach, cold and hard. This was not the haven she had envisioned, not the balm for her weary soul. This was an abandonment, a stark, unyielding truth laid bare under the unforgiving prairie sun. Her trunk, laden with all her worldly possessions and the remnants of her shattered past, felt impossibly heavy as the coachman, sensing her growing dread, merely grunted a terse farewell before snapping his reins and disappearing into the horizon, leaving her utterly, horrifyingly alone. The silence that descended then was not peaceful, but a roaring void, amplifying the frantic beat of her own heart. She stood, a solitary figure against the vast, indifferent sky, her vibrant dress an incongruous splash of color in the drab landscape, a beacon of hope suddenly extinguished. The air, thick with the scent of dry earth and unspoken desolation, pressed in on her, a suffocating blanket. The letter in her pocket, once a lifeline, now felt like a cruel joke, its elegant script mocking her naive belief. Her breath hitched, catching in her throat, a desperate prayer escaping unspoken. This was a place of ghosts, not of new beginnings, and she, a woman of the old South, far from her people, was nothing but another forgotten whisper carried on the wind. The sheer, terrifying weight of her isolation pressed down, threatening to crack the fragile facade of her resolve. Where was he? Where was the man who had written to her, promising a new world, a new life? The silence offered no answer, only a deepening dread. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and bruised purple, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like specters around the dilapidated house, mirroring the terrifying contortions of fear in her own mind. This was not merely absence. This was an alarming void. The dust devils danced lazily across the yard, miniature whirlwinds mocking the tempest raging within Naomi. The silence, initially oppressive, now felt like a premonition, a stretched cord ready to snap. She forced her tired legs to move, each step a testament to a dwindling hope, towards the dilapidated porch. The front door, ajar, revealed a shadowy interior, hinting at secrets and neglect. A faint scent of stale wood smoke, unwashed linens, and something indefinably sweet, like old milk, drifted out. Her hand hesitated on the doorframe, etched with years of sun and wind, before pushing it open further. The interior was gloomier than she anticipated, the air thick with the accumulated stillness of an unlived life. Dust motes, caught in stray shafts of light, danced in eerie silence. There was no sign of a man, no warmth of a recently departed presence, just the chill of a long-abandoned space. Her eyes, accustomed to the bright glare outside, strained to discern shapes in the dimness. A large, crude table dominated the main room, its surface scarred and bare. Chairs lay overturned, as if a sudden, violent departure had occurred. Then, a sound. Not the heavy bootfall of a man, but a tiny shuffling noise from the depths of the house, followed by a whispered giggle. Naomi froze, every muscle tensing, her breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She was not alone. From the shadowed doorway leading further into the house, a small face peered out, eyes wide and blue, hair the color of straw. A child. And then another, and another, like a cascade of secrets tumbling from the darkness. 7 of them, she counted, their faces smudged with dirt, their clothes ragged and too large, a motley collection of tiny, watchful figures. They ranged in age, from a toddler barely able to stand, clinging to the skirt of an older girl, to a boy of perhaps 10, his gaze unwavering, full of a cautious curiosity that bordered on defiance. All of them white. Their silence was profound, their little mouths pressed into thin lines, their eyes fixed on her, the dark-skinned stranger who had materialized on their doorstep. Naomi felt a surge of unreality, a dizzying disorientation. 7 children. The letter had mentioned no children. The photograph, a stark, formal portrait, had shown no family. The promise of a husband, a home, had been shattered into 1,000 jagged pieces by this unexpected, overwhelming revelation. She had come seeking refuge, a quiet corner in a hostile world, and instead found herself adrift in a sea of innocent, demanding eyes. Her mind reeled, trying to reconcile the stark reality before her with the neat, comforting narrative she had constructed. This was not merely an absence, it was a deception of monumental scale, a trick, a cruel joke played upon a desperate woman. Her throat tightened, raw with unshed tears, her carefully built composure fracturing. A tremor ran through her, not of fear, but of a profound, disorienting shock. The youngest child, drawn by an unspoken curiosity, detached from the older girl and toddled a step forward, a tiny hand reaching out, tentative and uncertain. The older boy, still watching her with that unnervingly shrewd gaze, pulled the toddler back gently, a protective instinct already formed. The unspoken question in their eyes was mirrored in hers. Who are you? And where is he? The weight of her own past, the reasons she had fled, converged with this impossible present. This was not a haven. This was a responsibility she had not sought, a burden of lives she did not know, anchored to a ghost of a man who was nowhere to be found. The sun dipped lower, bathing the dismal scene in a harsh golden light, highlighting every flaw, every fear. Naomi, a woman stripped bare of expectations, stood at the precipice of an unimaginable choice, the silent judgment of 7 young, untamed souls heavy upon her. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had sought an escape, only to find herself entrapped, not by chains, but by the silent, desperate pleas in the eyes of orphaned children. The silence in the dilapidated house stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the distant caw of a crow and the ragged rhythm of Naomi's own breath. She stood amidst the 7 children, a foreign landscape unfolding in their pale faces, their wide, unblinking eyes. Their gazes were a mixture of fear and raw curiosity, a potent brew that tightened the knot of dread in her stomach. Her initial instinct was a primal, desperate urge to flee, to retrace her steps, to run until the very memory of this desolate place and its unexpected inhabitants faded into the distant hum of the world she had left behind. She had come for a husband, for a promise of security, however tenuous, not for a ready-made family of lost souls, all white, all utterly dependent. The injustice of it all was a sharp, blinding pain. The deceptive letter, the absent man, the shocking revelation of these abandoned children, it felt like a cosmic cruelty, a mockery of her own desperate yearning for a quiet life. But where would she go? The coach had gone. The nearest town was a day's arduous journey on foot, a place whose very name, Hope's End, seemed to mock her current plight. Her meager savings, once a source of comfort, now felt like a handful of dust, insufficient to carry her back across the vast expanse of the country. And even if she could, what awaited her there? Only the familiar shadows, the constant whispers, the crushing weight of a past she had desperately tried to outrun. The world she had left was no kinder than this desolate frontier. She had made a choice, a desperate gamble on a stranger's word. And now the dice had landed on an unimaginable consequence. Her gaze swept over the children again, lingering on the smallest, who had begun to whimper softly, clutching at the tattered skirt of the oldest girl. They were just children, abandoned, like driftwood on a desolate shore. Her heart, hardened by years of its own quiet battles, felt a strange, unwelcome tremor. A flicker of an old memory, unbidden and sharp, cut through her turmoil. A cold, damp cellar, the scent of mildew and fear, the hushed cries of children she had once cared for. Children not her own, but who had looked to her for comfort, for safety. The warmth of a tiny hand in hers, a brief, fragile connection in a world that sought to sever all bonds. This was different, yet uncannily similar. These children, too, were in need, their vulnerability a silent, piercing accusation. It was an echo of a life she thought she had buried, a life defined by quiet acts of compassion, often met with indifference or worse. A deep sigh escaped her lips, heavy with exhaustion and reluctant resignation. The sun had begun to sink below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues, casting long, distorted shadows that stretched across the dusty floor. The air grew colder, and the youngest children shivered. She looked at the oldest boy, his eyes still fixed on her, unwavering. He was wary, guarded, a tiny sentinel in a forgotten fortress. "Where is your father?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse, foreign in her own ears. The boy's gaze dropped, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. He said nothing, only shook his head, a gesture of profound helplessness. The silence that followed was more damning than any accusation. It confirmed her fear. He was gone, utterly, completely gone. And in his place, these 7 faces, these 7 lives, were now somehow, impossibly, hers to contend with. The bitterness rose, a metallic taste in her mouth. She had fled one form of bondage, only to find herself shackled by another, forged not of chains, but of desperate, childlike need. The irony was a cruel, twisted joke. But as the light faded, and the chill of the evening crept into the dilapidated house, a deeper fear began to settle in her bones. Not just fear for herself, but a chilling premonition of what might happen to these children if she simply turned her back. The very air seemed to hum with the weight of her choice. A choice she hadn't known she would be forced to make. The memory of the children she had known before, the unspoken promise she had made to herself to never again be responsible for a pain she couldn't alleviate, echoed in the hollow chambers of her mind. This was a new kind of trap, woven from threads of desperation and human vulnerability, and she, unknowingly, had stepped right into its center. The decision, when it finally solidified, was not born of altruism, but of a grim, desperate calculus. Flight was impossible, and inaction meant watching these 7 pale, bewildered children starve or freeze. The sheer logistical nightmare of their survival pressed in on her, a chilling weight. Naomi, a woman who had spent a lifetime navigating a world designed to deny her agency, now found herself thrust into a role of unimaginable responsibility. Her past, a mosaic of indignities and quiet resistance, had taught her one brutal truth: survival was a solitary, relentless pursuit. But here, survival was intrinsically linked to 7 other fragile lives. A single, ragged blanket covered the 2 youngest, huddled on the floor. The older children lay curled together like a litter of pups, their shallow breaths stirring the stale air. She watched them, a profound weariness settling deep in her bones. This was not the future she had envisioned, not the quiet corner she had craved. This was a battlefield, and she, an unwitting warrior, was already bloodied by the silent conflict of abandonment. A flashback, stark and unbidden, pierced the suffocating gloom. The memory of the small, cramped room, the stench of fear and Lysol, the sharp, authoritative voice of the man who held her fate in his hand. "You'll be a good woman, a proper lady," he had rasped, his gaze cold and appraising, stripping her down to her very essence, weighing her against the unspoken expectations of a society that saw her as property, not person. Her choice then was simple, stark: endure the indignities, the casual cruelties, or find a way out, any way out. The advertisements for mail-order brides, tacked crudely on bulletin boards in back alleys, had seemed a desperate gamble, a narrow crack in the wall of her existence. He was a white man, Yes, but far away, on the frontier, where perhaps the rules were looser, the air less thick with judgment. She had believed, foolishly, that distance might dilute the inherent prejudice, that a new landscape might offer a chance for a new kind of existence. The memory of her sister's warning, hushed and urgent, echoed, "Be careful, Naomi. Men promise the moon, but deliver dust." Now she stood in a house of dust, surrounded by children who were clearly the dust of a broken promise. She had chosen the path of a mail-order bride, not out of romantic yearning, but out of a profound, bone-deep exhaustion. Exhaustion with the endless struggle, with the pervasive sense of being less than, with the crushing weight of systemic oppression. She had sought a quiet escape, a place where her skin color might be less of a mark, where her existence might be simply her own. The man's letters, filled with promises of a vast empty landscape and the chance to build a life from scratch, had seemed to offer just that, a blank slate, a chance to be unseen, unjudged. The irony was a bitter taste in her mouth. She had fled one kind of subjugation, only to find herself trapped in another, unforeseen and far more intimate. The children stirred in their sleep, small whimpers escaping one of the younger ones. They were a vivid, undeniable testament to the life of the man who had brought her here, a life he had clearly abandoned. And now she was left to bear the weight of his sins, to clean up the wreckage of his inexplicable departure. Her fingers, calloused from years of hard labor, instinctively sought out a loose floorboard near the hearth. This was no escape. This was merely a different kind of imprisonment, one that came with the heavy responsibility of tiny, innocent lives, who looked to her with a mixture of fear and an almost unbearable, silent hope. The silence of the house pressed in, amplifying the pounding of her heart. She closed her eyes. The desolate truth, a cold knot in her stomach. She was trapped, and her only way out, for now, was to somehow bring order to this chaos, to make a new kind of peace in this house of broken promises. The sheer scale of the task ahead felt insurmountable, a mountain range she had to cross on bare feet. The first days blurred into a grueling cycle of relentless labor and profound disorientation. The house was a monument to neglect, each dusty corner, every creaking floorboard, whispering tales of abandonment. Naomi, a stranger in a strange land, found herself immersed in the Herculean task of simply keeping 7 small, bewildered bodies fed and clothed. The concept of a quiet life, once a distant dream, now seemed a cruel joke. Her hands, though strong and accustomed to work, ached with the unyielding demands of an unfamiliar routine. Hauling water from the well, a rusty chain groaning in protest, became a daily ritual. The water, cold and metallic, served not only for drinking and washing but also for the endless scrubbing of grimy faces and clothes, a desperate attempt to impose some semblance of order on the pervasive chaos. Cooking was a constant challenge. The meager provisions left behind were dwindling, and she had no knowledge of foraging in this alien landscape. The children, still largely silent, watched her with wide, appraising eyes, a mixture of wariness and nascent curiosity. Their names, she learned slowly, haltingly, were a soft litany. Thomas, the eldest, his gaze sharp and guarded. Then Sarah, quiet and watchful. The boisterous twins, Jacob and Samuel, shy little Mary clutching a threadbare doll, and the 2 youngest, barely more than toddlers, Lizzie and Billy. Their cries the most piercing reminder of their profound vulnerability. The children themselves were a study in contrasts. Thomas, at 10, carried the weight of premature responsibility, his eyes holding a depth that belied his years. He was the most resistant, his loyalty fiercely pledged to an absent father, his resentment towards the dark-skinned woman who had invaded their precarious world palpable. Sarah, a year younger, was a shadow, observing Naomi with an unnerving intensity, her silence more eloquent than any words. The others, younger, were more malleable, their initial fear slowly giving way to a cautious fascination. One afternoon, as Naomi painstakingly mended a torn shirt, Billy, the youngest, toddled towards her, a grubby, well-loved wooden horse clutched in his tiny fist. He held it out, his face solemn. Naomi, her fingers still working the needle, met his gaze. It was a small gesture, insignificant to the world, but to her, It felt like a fragile bridge being built across a vast chasm. A fleeting, almost imperceptible warmth spread through her chest. It was not love, not yet, but a tiny spark of connection in the overwhelming darkness. The town, when she finally ventured into it, was a stark reminder of the world she had hoped to escape. Hope's End lived up to its name, a cluster of weathered buildings huddled together against the vast, indifferent prairie. The general store, its wooden porch creaking underfoot, was her first point of contact. The silence that fell as she stepped inside was not of welcome, but of an abrupt, hostile cessation of conversation. Eyes, pale and cold, followed her every move. Whispers, like the dry rustle of dead leaves, followed her through the narrow aisles. A colored woman, she heard, low and venomous. With white children? Who'd allow such a thing? The words were daggers, each one a sharp reminder of the inescapable prejudice that clung to her like a second skin. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with suspicion, gave her only curt, monosyllabic answers, his gaze refusing to meet hers directly. The weight of his unspoken judgment, and that of the town's silent, watchful eyes, was a tangible force, pressing down on her, threatening to crush her fragile composure. This was no escape. This was merely a different kind of cage, one where the bars were built of unspoken rules and chilling gazes, and the children, still bound to this place, were inextricably tied to her own precarious existence. The desperation that had led her here now felt like a curse, binding her to a fate she never chose. She left the store, her basket lighter, her heart heavier, the cold stares of the townspeople a lingering burn on her skin. The search for answers, for the ghost of the man who had brought her to this desolate place, became a quiet obsession. Naomi, pragmatic to her core, knew that understanding his disappearance was paramount, not only for her own sanity, but for the uncertain future of the children. She rummaged through the small, sparsely furnished rooms of the house, a detective in a tragedy, looking for any clue, any scrap of paper that might shed light on his sudden vanishing act. The bedroom, clearly once his, yielded little. A worn Bible on the nightstand, its pages brittle with age, offered no personal insights. A few crumpled letters, unopened and addressed to him, spoke of distant relatives, their handwriting unfamiliar. The air in the room was stale, thick with the scent of prolonged absence, as if the very walls held their breath, waiting for a revelation. It felt like walking through a dream, searching for substance in shadows. One afternoon, while sweeping the hearth, her broom snagged on a loose floorboard. Curiosity, a powerful current in her weary mind, compelled her to kneel beneath it. Tucked into a shallow hollow lay a small, tarnished tin box. Her heart quickened its beat, a tremor running through her. This felt different, more intimate, more hidden. Inside, nestled amongst a few faded photographs of stern-faced strangers, was a single, crumpled letter, its paper yellowed with age, its ink faded to a faint sepia. It was not from the children's father, but addressed to him. The handwriting was elegant, precise, yet imbued with a sense of urgency. The words, though fragmented and difficult to decipher in the dim light, spoke of debts, of pressures, of a desperate need to escape a growing shadow. "They are closing in," one phrase read, stark and chilling. "The arrangement must be made." Another, even more unsettling. "The children, they must be safe, far from here." The letter ended abruptly, unsigned, a chilling testament to an unseen threat. A cold dread coiled in her stomach. This wasn't merely a man who had abandoned his family. He was a man on the run, entangled in something far more dangerous than simple neglect. The children, then, were not just a burden, but perhaps a liability, a living testament to a past he sought to erase. The revelation was both terrifying and clarifying. It explained his absence, but opened a new, terrifying abyss of uncertainty. Was he a criminal? A swindler? And what implications did his secret life hold for her? A stranger who had walked unknowingly into the very heart of his abandoned life. The silence in the house, once merely empty, now felt heavy with unspoken threats, with the echoes of desperate decisions. As the days turned into weeks, a fragile shift occurred in the children's wary acceptance of her. The sheer consistency of her presence, her quiet endurance, chipped away at their defenses. It began with Lizzie, the youngest, her tiny hand instinctively reaching for Naomi's while she scrubbed clothes at the pump. Then Billy, who would crawl onto her lap while she mended their worn garments, falling asleep to the rhythmic pull of her needle. Even Mary, the shyest, began to bring her small drawings of stick figures and crooked houses. But it was Thomas, the oldest, the most resistant, who offered the most significant, though still hesitant, olive branch. One evening, as Naomi struggled to light the damp kindling in the hearth, Thomas, usually aloof, came forward. Without a word, he took the struggling match from her hand, knelt, and with a practiced ease, coaxed a reluctant flame from the stubborn wood. The flickering light illuminated his face, revealing a flicker of something akin to grudging respect in his eyes. He didn't speak, but the simple act was louder than any declaration. In that small, quiet moment, a fragile bridge was finally built between them, a silent acknowledgement of shared vulnerability and a nascent understanding. It was not affection, not yet, but a fundamental acceptance, a recognition of her as something more than just a temporary, unwanted intruder. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Naomi, warmed by its glow, felt a sliver of hope, tenuous but persistent, ignite within her. She was not alone in this desolate place. The children, perhaps, were not just a burden, but a fragile, unexpected anchor in a turbulent sea. This tiny, burgeoning connection was a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness, but it was enough to keep her going, to make her push forward, even when the shadows of the past and the uncertainty of the future threatened to consume her. The weight of the letter in the tin box still pressed in her mind, a cold reminder of the danger that might still be lurking. But for now, the warmth of the fire and the quiet presence of the children were a temporary shield against the encroaching dread. The fragile peace within the house was a thin veneer against the escalating external pressures. The town of Hope's End, its whispers growing louder, its stares sharper, became a palpable threat. Naomi's infrequent trips to the general store were met with open hostility now, not just silent judgment. She heard snippets of conversation, venomous and deliberate. "It's an unnatural arrangement," spat Mrs. Gable, her jowls quivering with indignation, her eyes raking over Naomi's dark skin. Then the pale children waiting outside the store. "The poor dears, being raised by that." The word hung in the air, thick with unspoken prejudice, a heavy stone thrown into the fragile pond of Naomi's new existence. Mr. Henderson, the store owner, now outright refused to extend her credit, his eyes averted, his voice stiff. "No more, ma'am. Times are hard. Can't be giving goods away." His words were a thinly veiled excuse, the true reason screaming in the frigid silence that followed. The children, too, began to feel the sting of the town's animosity. Thomas, venturing out to fetch water from the communal pump, returned one afternoon, his face pale, his jaw set. "They called me names," he mumbled, refusing to meet her eyes, his shoulders slumped. "Said I was living with a heathen." Naomi's heart clenched. She had come here to escape the casual cruelty of such words, but it seemed prejudice, like a stubborn weed, found fertile ground wherever humans congregated. It was a vicious irony, one that gnawed at her resolve. She had hoped to find a sanctuary, but instead, she had brought the battle with her, an invisible war fought in the subtle glances and cruel pronouncements of a narrow-minded community. The children, innocent in their circumstances, were now bearing the brunt of a hatred that had nothing to do with them and everything to do with her. The constant struggle for resources intensified, adding another layer of despair. The small plot of land around the house yielded little, and without money, food became a constant, gnawing worry. The children's hunger, reflected in their hollowed cheeks and the persistent grumbling of their stomachs, was a relentless, silent accusation. She tried to hunt, borrowing an old rusty rifle she found in the barn, but her aim was poor, her experience nil. The animals of the prairie, sleek and swift, eluded her, mocking her desperation. The irony was a bitter taste. She, who had once prided herself on her self-sufficiency, was now utterly dependent on the very community that sought to ostracize her. One harsh, unforgiving afternoon, as the first biting winds of autumn swept across the plains, An official-looking buggy pulled up outside the house. Two men, their faces stern and unyielding, dismounted. One, the town sheriff, a burly man with a permanent scowl, was flanked by a thin, prim woman from the local benevolent society. Their purpose was clear, their intentions chilling. "We've had reports, ma'am," the sheriff rumbled, his voice devoid of warmth. "Concerns about the children, their welfare." The woman, Mrs. Albright, her lips pursed, peered into the house, her gaze sweeping over the children huddled fearfully in the corner. Her eyes held a judgmental, pitying disdain. "This is no place for proper Christian children," she declared, her voice dripping with self-righteousness, "and being raised by someone not of their own kind. It's simply not right." Naomi stood on the porch, her heart pounding, the weight of their judgment pressing down on her, an invisible hand at her throat. She knew what they wanted: to take the children, to remove them from her care, to sever the fragile bonds she had begun to forge. This was the true battlefield, where her very existence, her very identity, was under attack. The air crackled with unspoken threats, the chilling implications of their visit hanging heavy between them. She was a woman cornered, her options dwindling, and the vast, indifferent prairie offered no escape from the relentless tide of prejudice. The fear, cold and sharp, pierced her resolve, yet in stubborn defiance began to harden her gaze. The sheriff's words, "concerns about the children," echoed in the oppressive silence of the little house long after their buggy had disappeared down the dusty road, leaving behind a lingering scent of suspicion and threat. Mrs. Albright's contemptuous gaze, sweeping over the children and then her, had been a physical blow, a stark reminder of the fragile ground she occupied. It wasn't just a matter of survival now. It was a battle for the very right to exist, for the right to nurture these forgotten lives. The fear was a cold, constant companion, but it was slowly hardening into a quiet rage, a desperate defiance. She had come here seeking anonymity, a peaceful oblivion, but instead, she had found herself at the epicenter of a storm, the unwitting protector of a brood she had not chosen, yet could not abandon. The discovery of the tin box and the cryptic letter had planted a seed of nagging suspicion in her mind, a mystery that gnawed at her, demanding answers. The sheriff's visit, so clearly linked to the children's welfare, made the connection even more urgent. Where was their father, the man who had written to her, promising a life that was a cruel deception? Was he truly just a coward, or was there something darker, more sinister at play? One evening, as the children slept fitfully, their small bodies huddled together for warmth, Naomi sat by the dying embers of the fire, the faded letter spread out on the table before her. She reread the fragmented sentences, piecing together the chilling narrative. Debts closing in. The children. They must be safe, far from here. It painted a picture of a man desperate, cornered, not merely absent, but vanished by design. He hadn't just left them. He had fled from something terrifying. A sudden, sharp memory surfaced, unbidden, from one of Thomas's fleeting moments of reluctant conversation. He had once mentioned, almost in passing, a man with a limp who used to visit their father, his voice always low and urgent. He wore a fancy hat, Thomas had added, and smelled like strong pipe tobacco. Naomi pieced this together with a faint, almost invisible imprint on the inside of the tin box, a small circular indentation, as if a heavy signet ring had often rested there. This wasn't the carelessness of a simple runaway. This was the calculated disappearance of someone in deep trouble. The implications were chilling. If he was running, what was he running from? And if it involved these children, was that threat still lurking? A phantom danger, waiting to ensnare them, and by extension, her. The air in the house seemed to thicken with unspoken tension, the silence now a cloak for unseen dangers. The reality was a bitter pill to swallow. She had been drawn into a web of someone else's making, a deception far deeper than simple abandonment. The man had used her desperation, her longing for a new beginning, as a shield, a cover for his escape. He had placed the burden of his secret, and his children, squarely on her unsuspecting shoulders. The raw injustice of it all burned within her, a simmering resentment. But underneath the anger, a chilling understanding began to dawn. The sheriff's visit might not just be about concern for the children's welfare, but perhaps a part of a larger, darker search, connected to the very man who had brought her here. She was not just a substitute mother. She was a witness, an unwitting participant in a drama whose true nature she was only just beginning to grasp. The light of the oil lamp cast long, dancing shadows on the walls, mimicking the turmoil in her mind. Naomi looked at the sleeping children, their faces innocent and vulnerable in the dim light. They were inextricably linked to this mystery, to this dangerous past. And now, so was she. The realization was stark and terrifying. This house, this life, this very act of caring for these children was not a step towards freedom, but a deeper entanglement. The bitter taste of deception filled her mouth. She had wanted to escape a life of being seen as less, but now she was caught in a snare far more intricate, far more perilous. The threat, unseen but palpable, lingered in the air, a constant reminder that their precarious existence was built on a foundation of shifting sand. She was not just a mother to these children, she was their last line of defense against a world that sought to claim them, perhaps even against the long, grasping shadow of their own father's perilous past. The true test of Naomi's resolve came on a bitter, unforgiving day, when the wind howled like a banshee across the prairie, stripping the last vestiges of hope from the land. The meager supplies were gone, the last handful of flour scraped from the bottom of the sack. The children, their faces pale and drawn, shivered despite the paltry fire she managed to coax from damp wood. Billy, the youngest, began to cough, a dry, rattling sound that tore at her heart. His skin felt hot to her touch, his breath shallow. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through the weariness that had become her constant companion. This was no longer just about survival. It was about life and death. The community, through its cruel whispers and icy stares, had effectively cut them off, leaving them to wither and fade in their isolated homestead. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she could not let them starve, could not let disease claim the most vulnerable. Her internal struggle was brutal. Every fiber of her being, conditioned by years of being told her place, rebelled against begging, against asking for help from those who judged her so harshly. But the children's faces, their quiet suffering, were a powerful, undeniable force, overriding her pride, her anger, her ingrained self-preservation. She looked at Thomas, his eyes wide and fearful, his usual defiance replaced by a raw vulnerability. Sarah, usually so quiet, was clutching Billy's hand, her own small face etched with worry. This was not about her anymore. This was about them. With a fierce, desperate resolve, she wrapped the feverish Billy in a threadbare blanket, cradling him against her chest. "Thomas," she said, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Watch the others. I'll be back." She knew the town was a viper's nest, a place where her presence was met with hostility, but it was their only hope. Her path to the general store was a gauntlet of piercing stares and mocking whispers. The biting wind whipped at her clothes, mirroring the tempest within her. As she entered the store, cradling the small, feverish child, the usual hubbub of conversation ceased abruptly, replaced by an unnatural silence. All eyes turned to her, a sea of pale, unforgiving faces. Mr. Henderson, his face still unyielding, emerged from behind the counter. "I told you, ma'am," he began, his voice hard. "No more credit." Naomi stepped forward, her voice raw but clear, cutting through the thick silence. "My child is sick," she stated, her gaze unwavering, not pleading, but declaring a fundamental truth. She held Billy higher, revealing his flushed face, his shallow breaths. "He needs medicine. Food. We have nothing." Her voice was a stark, unadorned statement of fact, stripped of pride, yet imbued with a quiet power. A murmur rippled through the assembled townspeople, some faces softening, others hardening further. Mrs. Albright, the woman from the Benevolent Society, stepped forward, her lips pursed, her eyes cold. "It's a pity, but not our concern," she declared, her voice sharp. "Those children should be in a proper home, with their own kind." Suddenly, a voice, surprisingly clear and strong, cut through the tension. "He's just a baby, Mrs. Albright. Are you truly so heartless?" The speaker was a young woman, perhaps barely older than Sarah. with kind eyes, her face framed by a simple bonnet. She was Hannah, the daughter of the local doctor, a quiet soul known for her gentle nature. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out tentatively to touch Billy's forehead. "He needs help," she insisted, her gaze meeting Naomi's, a flicker of genuine compassion in her eyes. The raw emotion of the moment, the blatant injustice of the town's indifference against the undeniable vulnerability of a feverish child, created a powerful, silent climax. All eyes were on Naomi, then on Hannah, then back to the townspeople, their own consciences now challenged. The air crackled with a silent tension, the fate of a small, fragile life hanging in the balance, and with it, the very soul of the community. It was a confrontation not of words, but of humanity against hardened prejudice, and Naomi, standing resolute, was its unwavering heart. The young woman's unexpected intervention, Hannah, the doctor's daughter, broke the suffocating spell of the town's indifference. Her words, though softly spoken, resonated with a clarity that shamed the hardened faces around them. "He's just a baby," she repeated, her gaze unflinching as she met Mrs. Albright's steely eyes. The weight of the moment, the blatant disregard for a suffering child, hung heavy in the air. A few of the townspeople shifted uneasily, their gazes dropping to the floor. The unspoken question in Hannah's voice was a powerful accusation, echoing the silent plea of the feverish child in Naomi's arms. Mrs. Albright, caught off guard, sputtered, her self-righteousness momentarily faltering. The sheriff, too, looked uncomfortable, his usual bluster deflated by the undeniable vulnerability of the child. Naomi, her own strength drawn from a reservoir she hadn't known she possessed, met the gaze of each person in that store, her eyes holding not anger, but a profound, unyielding truth. She had fled a life of being invisible, only to find herself here, forced to be utterly, painfully visible. But this time, she would not shrink. "These children," she stated, her voice steady now, carrying through the stunned silence, "have no one else. Their father is gone, and I, a stranger to them, have taken them in. If that is not Christian, then what is?" Her words, direct and unadorned, stripped away the layers of prejudice, revealing the stark human reality beneath. It was a challenge, a raw plea, and an unwavering declaration of her own reluctant yet fierce commitment. The air crackled with the unspoken judgment of a society that could not comprehend such a bond, such an act of unexpected compassion. Hannah, emboldened by Naomi's unwavering stance, stepped forward. "My father is a doctor," she said, her voice stronger now, directed at Mr. Peyton Henderson. "He will see the child, and if you refuse them, Mr. Henderson, then the town will know where your charity truly lies." Her words, backed by the implicit authority of her father, the town's only physician, held sway. Mr. Henderson, his face still grim, finally relented. He gestured curtly towards the medicine cabinet. "All right, girl, take what you need. But this is the last of it. Understand?" He spoke to Naomi, but his gaze darted nervously towards Hannah, acknowledging the power shift, however temporary. The tension in the store began to dissipate, replaced by a low hum of chatter, now infused with a grudging respect, or perhaps simply curiosity. Naomi took the necessary supplies, her hands trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from the immense relief that flooded her. As she turned to leave, Hannah followed her out onto the porch. "Come to our house," she said, her voice soft but firm. "My father can properly examine the boy, and we have some food that won't go to waste." Her words were a lifeline, an unexpected gesture of kindness in a sea of hostility. Naomi met her gaze, a profound gratitude swelling within her. "Thank you," she managed, the words catching in her throat, raw with emotion. Hannah simply nodded, a quiet understanding passing between them. As Naomi walked back towards the desolate house, Billy warm against her chest, a profound shift occurred within her. The children, once a burden, a testament to her own entrapment, were now something else entirely. They were her purpose, her unexpected family, forged in the crucible of abandonment and societal prejudice. The bitterness of her initial arrival had been slowly, painstakingly, replaced by a fierce, protective love. This was her battle, and these children, their small, trusting faces turned towards her, were her reason for fighting. The world outside might judge, might condemn, but within the walls of that humble house, a new kind of family, unexpected and resilient, was beginning to bloom, rooted in an act of profound, desperate love. The resolution wasn't a sudden burst of sunshine, but a gradual clearing of the heavy, suffocating clouds, a promise of a new kind of dawn. The crisis with Billy and Hannah's unexpected intervention had irrevocably altered the landscape of Naomi's existence. It was a turning point, a visible crack in the wall of the town's united prejudice, allowing a slender ray of hope to pierce through the gloom. News of Naomi's desperate stand in the general store, of Hannah's quiet defiance, rippled through Hope's End. For some, it hardened their hearts further, confirming their worst fears about the unnatural woman and her brood. But for others, a flicker of grudging respect, a glimmer of shame, began to take root. The doctor, Hannah's father, a gruff but decent man, did indeed tend to Billy, prescribing tonics and rest, and quietly sent a basket of food to Naomi's door, delivered by Hannah herself. This small act of kindness, repeated over the following weeks, became a lifeline, a testament to a burgeoning, unlikely alliance. Naomi, for her part, embraced her role with a fierce, unwavering dedication. The daily struggle remained immense, but her spirit, once weary and resigned, was now infused with a newfound purpose. The house, once a symbol of abandonment, slowly transformed under her tireless hands. The windows were cleaned, letting in more light. The broken porch was patched. The walls, though still faded, radiated a subtle warmth. She learned to mend, to sew, to make do with what little they had, her resourcefulness a quiet act of defiance against the harsh realities of their isolation. The children, too, sensing the shift in her, responded with an outpouring of affection and a quiet trust that warmed her to the core. Thomas, once so guarded, now sought her out for quiet conversations about farming and the stars. Sarah, the watchful one, began to confide her small fears and dreams. The younger ones, Lizzie and Billy, clung to her skirts, their laughter echoing through the once silent rooms. They were no longer just children she was forced to care for. They were her children, bound by an invisible thread of shared hardship and burgeoning love. The irony was profound. She had come seeking a husband, a male protector in a harsh world, and instead had become the unwavering, formidable protector of 7 lost souls. Yet, the shadow of the absent father, the mystery of his disappearance, still lingered, a haunting presence that Naomi could not fully shake. The tin box, hidden again beneath the floorboard, was a constant reminder of the unseen dangers that might still be lurking. She knew that true peace would only come when she understood the full extent of the man's past and the fate that had befallen him. But for now, the immediate need to nurture and protect her newfound family consumed her. The fear of external threats, the town's lingering prejudice, remained a daily reality. The whispers still followed her. The stares still burned. But now, she met them with a quiet strength, a resolute gaze that defied their judgment. She was no longer just a black woman in a white man's world. She was a mother, a guardian, a force to be reckoned with. Her dark skin, once a mark of vulnerability, now seemed to lend her an almost elemental strength, a rootedness to the very earth she walked upon. The seasons turned, marking the passage of time not with a calendar, but with the changing needs of her growing family. The children, thriving under her care, were testament to her quiet triumph. She taught them to read, using the worn Bible she had found, its pages now filled not only with scripture but with the scrawled names of her children, a new kind of family tree. She taught them about resilience, about compassion, about facing a world that might not always be kind. Her wisdom, forged in the fires of her own trials, became their guiding light. This was not the life she had imagined, nor the destiny she had sought, but it was, undeniably, hers. The initial bitterness had transmuted into a profound sense of belonging, an unexpected joy woven into the fabric of daily struggle. The house, once a cold, empty shell, now pulsed with the vibrant, chaotic life of a family, a true home forged not by blood, but by an unwavering, unconditional love that had defied every expectation and triumphed over every formidable obstacle. The years that followed were a testament to Naomi's enduring spirit, a slow, arduous journey from reluctant guardian to the undeniable matriarch of the desolate homestead. The initial hardship, the crushing weight of responsibility, had slowly, painstakingly transmuted into a deep, abiding love. The house, once a silent, dust-choked testament to abandonment, now hummed with the vibrant, chaotic symphony of 7 children growing, learning, and thriving under her unwavering care. The memories of her own past, the indignities and quiet struggles, no longer felt like shackles, but like the very bedrock upon which she had built this improbable new life. She had arrived seeking an escape, a quiet oblivion, but found instead a profound purpose, a battle fought not with weapons, but with relentless compassion and unyielding determination. The town of Hope's End, a place once synonymous with cold judgment and biting prejudice, had slowly, grudgingly, softened its stance. The initial hostility, the venomous whispers, never entirely faded, but they lost their power, blunted by Naomi's consistent presence and the undeniable evidence of her devotion. The doctor and his daughter Hannah remained steadfast allies, their quiet support a beacon in the pervasive gloom. Their friendship, forged in a moment of crisis, proved to be an anchor, providing not only medical aid but also a rare, genuine human connection in a world that often felt utterly alien. Other townspeople, witnessing the children's transformation from ragged, forlorn orphans to spirited, well-cared-for individuals, could not deny the silent, powerful testimony of Naomi's love. Some still averted their eyes, rooted in their ingrained biases, but others began to offer small, hesitant gestures of acceptance, a nod at the general store, a polite greeting on the road, a rare, unbidden offering of surplus produce. These were small victories, hard-won but meaningful. The children, her children, were living proof of her triumph. Thomas, once fiercely protective of his absent father's memory, had grown into a steady, reliable young man, his loyalty now undeniably hers. Sarah, quiet and observant, had developed a keen mind, her hands nimble with a needle, assisting Naomi in the endless tasks of running their home. The twins, Jacob and Samuel, remained boisterous, their laughter a constant joy, while shy Mary found her voice in the stories Naomi told by the firelight. Lizzie and Billy, the youngest, knew no other mother, their early memories inextricably woven with Naomi's comforting presence, her gentle touch, her unwavering gaze. They were a family, not by blood, but by choice, by necessity, by a bond forged in the crucible of extraordinary circumstances. They were a living testament to the powerful, transformative nature of unconditional love, a testament to the belief that family is built on far more than mere lineage. Yet, the lingering question of the missing father remained, a distant, unspoken shadow in the periphery of their hard-won peace. Naomi had never actively pursued the truth of his disappearance beyond the cryptic letter, focusing instead on the tangible needs of the children before her. She had come to understand that his fate, whatever it was a story not hers to unravel entirely, nor one that could diminish the profound truth of the family she had built. His absence was what had led her here, what had forged this unlikely, beautiful unit. The irony was a soft, bittersweet melody in her heart. She had journeyed across a continent for a promise of security from a man, only to find her truest security, her deepest purpose, in becoming the unchosen mother to his abandoned children. The old house, once a symbol of dereliction, was now a sanctuary, its walls breathing with the accumulated history of shared laughter, quiet sorrows, and an unwavering resilience. Naomi, though her hair was streaked with silver and her hands gnarled with age, carried herself with a quiet dignity, a profound sense of belonging. She was no longer just a mail-order bride, a desperate woman seeking refuge. She was Naomi, the mother of 7, the steadfast heart of a family that had defied all odds. Her journey, steeped in the bitter irony of its beginning, had culminated in a profound, hopeful resolution, the creation of a home, a family, and a life far richer, far more meaningful than any she could have ever imagined for herself. The sun set over the plains, casting long, peaceful shadows, and within the warm glow of the little house, The quiet pulse of an extraordinary life continued, a beacon of hope in the vast, unforgiving landscape.